welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Happy Friday, guys. I hope you guys are doing well. This week has been really cool. We've discussed my favorite watches from Alfredo Paramico's collection. We created a video continuing our series on learning about vintage watches. We discussed what is important to collectors when it comes to vintage watches. And today we're going to be discussing the Vacheron Constantin Toledo and why I absolutely love this watch. I'll discuss some of the history of the watch, as well as kind of give you my 2 cents on why I fell in love with this watch kind of throughout the video, but also at the end. So that's gonna be the topic for today. As always, if you are new to the channel, be sure to smash that like button for us. It really does help us out. Just hit it as much as you possibly can. Also, while you're by that like button, just move up a little bit, hit that subscribe button for us. We create videos about watches, so if you like those types of videos, you might as well subscribe to our channel. So, like I said, the Vacheron Constantin is actually one of my favorite watches ever produced. Kind of when I was slowly getting into watches, I stumbled across a video that I don't know if it was created by Vacheron Constantin, but it kind of outlined the story of the video was basically a gentleman who owned a Vacheron Constantin calendar moon phase watch. It was actually the reference 4764. And the idea was that he had received it from his father and he was taking it to Geneva, to Vacheron Constantin, and having the manufacturer service the watch. So I stumbled across this video and absolutely fell in love with Vacheron Constantin, this specific reference of the Toledo, and kind of just the romance that there is with having your watch having your watch serviced by the manufacturer. So I absolutely loved this calendar moon phase, so I kind of dove a little bit deeper into Vacheron Constantin and realized that there were actually a really interesting history of the Toledo line. So this watch was actually released around the 1950s, and this was a kind of a new case design for Vacheron Constantin. They had produced watches in a square case, but it was a little bit different, kind of unusual, and not like a lot of the other square watches that had been released during that time period. The kind of shape of it is actually described as being a curved square. You can kind of see that the edges are a little bit softer, they're not as angular, kind of like on the sides of an iPhone, but also the case is a little bit steeped as you kind of move down the watch horizontally. So it's kind of described as a curved square, which I think is a good way of describing it. Of course, Italian collectors kind of fell in love with this reference. This is a really cool watch to own, and they end up kind of having a nickname for the watch, and that is the Cioccolatone, which was a popular way of describing the Toledo by Italian collectors. So the first, and for just so that you know, the Cioccolatone is actually these chocolate squares that are extremely popular in Italy and across Europe, and that's why they decided to name the Toledo the Cioccolatone, because it kind of reminds them of that square of chocolate. So the first reference that was released of the Toledo, as I said, was in the early 1950s, and this was a manual wind time-only version of this watch. It was the reference 4821 and 4822. These were obviously successors. 22 was a successor of the 21, and these watches ran off the Calibre 453 and 454. This is really the birth of the Toledo line, and I think kind of created the kind of path of where the Toledo ended up going. It's a very simple dial, really simple hands. The hands are, very simple dial layout, very simple hands, but really have a lot of the design elements that created this line. This is where it all stemmed from, and without this watch, I don't think, we'd be where we are today. So that was the first reference. This was a manual wind version of the watch. Then in 1951, Vacheron Constantin actually created the Calibre 1019, which was one of their first, not the first, but one of the first self-winding movements that they had created. And they ended up creating the reference 4737, which ran off the Calibre 1019, like I said, and this came in a couple of variations and probably is one of the more collectible versions of this watch. The watch comes in yellow gold, which is the most common. Beautiful yellow gold, kind of like a nice yellow kind of dial. Then there's the rose gold version of this watch, which is a lot more rare than the yellow gold version. And then there's actually a white gold version of this watch, but there are only 2 known in the entire world of the Toledo reference 4737 in white gold. So this was a cool kind of phase, because this is kind of where this watch kind of becomes a little bit more collectible, because you can get iterations of this watch in different case metals. Also, it has a very significant movement in it. The 1019, like I said, was one of the first Vacheron Constantin self-winding movements. So a very significant part of Vacheron Constantin's history, but also of the Toledo line. The next reference that came out after that is the 6440 and 644Q. These two references were after the 4737 and ran off the Calibre 1071 and 1072. The 1072 actually featured a date function, which is what the 6440Q has. So this was a little bit different and kind of like an oddball in the Toledo lines, because the Toledo has always been a little bit more classic up to this point, a little bit more simple, time-only watch. With adding this date function, it kind of gave it a little bit of a different spin and changed kind of the proportions of how the dial's laid out. So an interesting way of going, and I think this might have kind of brought them into creating that calendar watch that they ended up producing after this. But it does look a little bit different than your typical Toledo. In my opinion, it's not my favorite reference of the Vacheron Constantin Toledo line, but each their own, right? And so yeah, that was the next reference that came out. The next reference after that, and this is the one that I saw in the video that I fell in love with, and is probably one of the most desired Cioccolatones that was ever produced, and that is the reference 4764. This watch, like I said, is a calendar watch. It's running off the Calibre 485 and 489. Obviously they had two different calibers as they kind of iterated on their designs, and this watch features a day, date, month, and moon phase indicator. So it is a complicated piece. I just think this is probably one of the most classic looking Vacheron Constantins ever produced. This is truly, if you're looking for something very, if you're looking for something vintagey, get the modern version of this. This is like the typical Vacheron Constantin, very high-end Swiss watchmaking version of the Toledo. I absolutely love the way the moon phase kind of interacts with the dial. I actually like the way that the case is kind of curved. It almost gives a curvature to the dial as well, and kind of just it's a very soft and kind of just romantic looking piece. So this is one of the most desired. There's been a couple that's been up for auction recently. I don't remember exactly what they sold for, but I do remember watching the auctions and just being amazed. I absolutely love this reference. This is probably my favorite. I also would say the 4737 is one of my favorites. So of the vintage line of Cioccolatones. So that was the next reference to come out. And then you kind of saw a lull in the Toledo lines until about the 1990s. And this was kind of when Vacheron Constantin re-released the Toledo line. They came out with a heritage-inspired line of watches, and of course the Toledo was going to be a part of that. So they released the reference 42100, which was, again, like their classic, the first Cioccolatone that was ever released. It was a time-only reference and ran off the Calibre 1312. They, I think, did the original version justice. I think they took a lot of their design elements from that original reference, which was that 4821. Probably took a little bit from the 4737 as well, because that's really where things came, kind of the Cioccolatone came into its own. So that was what they did in the 1990s. And then of course there are the modern versions of the Toledo that they are releasing. The modern versions, obviously they have the time-only version, but they also have the calendar version, which is a little bit more expensive. The time-only version is actually really, really beautiful too. So if you are looking for these watches but can't really find a vintage version of it, look at the modern lines. So like I kind of said throughout this video, I really love this watch because of the case shape. I think it has a very soft, curved square, very kind of just romantic kind of case shape and dial layout. I like the fact that it really does trace Vacheron Constantin's history, especially with their iterations of self-winding movements. But also, you know, that video really made me fall in love with this watch and made me fall in love with Vacheron Constantin's history. That's kind of why I absolutely love the Toledo. Vacheron Constantin is one of my favorite manufacturers. Naturally, the Toledo is a part of that kind of story. If you haven't seen the video where the individual kind of takes the watch to the manufacturer and takes his Toledo to the manufacturer and kind of learns about the history of Vacheron Constantin, but also gets it serviced, I would recommend watching it. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the description for you. So that's why I absolutely love the Vacheron Constantin Toledo. If you've made it this far and you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. Also subscribe to the channel if you like videos about watches. If you have a watch that you think I should take a look at and kind of trace the history of, let me know. And with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time.